Karen's mornings always started the same way, with the soft buzz of her phone gently pulling her from sleep and the faint smell of coffee brewing downstairs. But unlike most people who might reach for a social media scroll or a quick weather check, Karen's first act of the day was something far more deliberate and, as some would say, obsessive. She would sit at her kitchen table, open her laptop, and begin composing an email. No, not just any email. A detailed, meticulously written message addressed to the Homeowners Association. It was her daily ritual, her way of making sure her voice was heard in the neighborhood she cared about so deeply. Karen wasn't a complainer in the usual sense, but she was intensely passionate about the community she lived in. To her, the HOA was more than just a governing body. It was the heart of her neighborhood's well-being. She noticed things others didn't. The crooked fence on Maple Street, the flickering streetlight by the community park, the growing patch of weeds near the clubhouse entrance. She believed that if she didn't speak up, those small issues would spiral into bigger problems that could drag down the whole area's charm and value. Her emails were like mini reports, sometimes long and filled with photos, sometimes brief, but urgent. One day she'd write about the uneven pavement that had caused her neighbor's mother to trip, and the next she'd point out the rules about trash bin placement being ignored by several houses. Each message was carefully crafted, signed off politely, and sent early enough that it could be among the first things the HOA staff would see in their inbox. To Karen, this wasn't a nuisance or a chore. It was a mission. It made her feel connected, useful, and empowered. But outside her little bubble, her neighbors weren't so sure what to make of her daily emails. Some thought she was a hero, someone who truly cared about keeping the neighborhood clean and safe. Others found her relentless, and frankly a bit much. "She emails the HOA every single day," whispered Mrs. Jacobs over the fence. "I don't even check my emails that often." Some would laugh, saying, "Karen's like a human alarm clock for the HOA." But it wasn't funny to Karen when people dismissed her efforts. She was doing it all for the community, not for attention. What none of them realized was that Karen's emails were being quietly buried, never read, never responded to. The HOA had a system in place, a filter that automatically diverted her messages into the spam folder, unseen by the very people she was trying to reach. It wasn't an official policy, but more of a silent tactic born from frustration. The HOA staff, overwhelmed with dozens of emails each day, found Karen's constant messages overwhelming. They didn't want to confront her directly, so they simply set their filters to shunt her messages aside, hoping she would eventually stop. This invisible blockade was a mystery to Karen at first. She would send her emails and wait expectantly for a reply, some acknowledgement that her concerns were taken seriously. But days passed, then weeks, and the silence grew heavier. "No, thank you for your input. No, we're looking into it." Not even a generic auto response. It was as if she was speaking into a void. Karen began to doubt herself. Maybe she was being too harsh, too demanding. Perhaps the HOA was too busy or didn't find her issues important enough. But deep down, she knew her concerns were valid. The cracked sidewalk was a real hazard. The broken street lamp left the park unsafe at night. The grass growing wildly near the clubhouse was unsightly and a breeding ground for pests. These things mattered. And Karen's belief in the importance of her emails only strengthened. What made it even more frustrating was that she could see neighbors chatting with the HOA in person or over phone calls, and occasionally she heard that some of her fellow residents got quick replies or fixes. Yet her messages remained unanswered, invisible behind the scenes. It was like trying to send a message in a bottle out to sea. No matter how many she threw, none ever washed ashore. Despite this, Karen didn't back down. She doubled down on her efforts. If one email didn't work, she sent another, often several in a day, making sure no issue went unmentioned. Sometimes she copied the HOA manager directly, hoping to bypass the spam filters. She started keeping logs, marking down dates and times, just in case she needed proof of her persistence. At community events, when neighbors asked if she got any response, Karen would force a smile and say, "Not yet, but I'm hopeful." She didn't want to admit the truth, that she felt ignored and invisible, that her daily ritual was a one-sided conversation. Still, in her heart, Karen believed that her efforts would eventually make a difference. She imagined a future where her emails sparked change, where her dedication inspired others to care a little more. That hope kept her going. What many didn't see was how much time and energy Karen poured into her emails. Each morning, before work, she'd comb through the neighborhood, jotting down notes and taking photos on her phone. Then she'd draft her emails with care, sometimes rewriting them multiple times to get the tone just right, firm but polite, persistent but not hostile. This was more than just complaint box venting. For Karen, this was civic duty, wrapped up in a daily digital letter. But as her frustration simmered beneath the surface, Karen started to suspect something was wrong beyond just silence. She wondered if there was a technical glitch, or if her emails were somehow getting lost in cyberspace. One evening, she called her tech-savvy nephew and asked him to check her email account settings. That's when she discovered it. Her emails were flagged as spam by the HOA's email system, and no one was seeing them. The revelation hit her like a punch to the gut. All that time and effort, all those carefully composed messages, were never even read. It was a crushing blow, but it also sparked a fire inside her. If the HOA wanted to ignore her, fine, but she wasn't going to let her voice be silenced that easily. Karen made a decision right then and there. She would find a way to break through the digital wall, to make sure her concerns were heard loud and clear. This was just the beginning. The neighborhood might think she was that email lady, but Karen knew she was fighting for something bigger, a community that deserved to be cared for, listened to, and respected. And she wasn't about to stop until the HOA could no longer ignore her presence, no matter what folder her emails ended up in. Karen's days slowly started to blend into a frustrating blur as she waited for a sign that her emails had finally reached someone at the HOA. Each morning, like clockwork, she would send her carefully written messages and then spend the day scanning her inbox and phone, hoping for a reply. But the silence was deafening. Not a single read receipt, no acknowledgement of any kind. She began to notice a gnawing feeling growing inside her. Was her voice truly being heard, or was she just shouting into an endless void? At first, Karen tried to stay optimistic. Maybe the HOA was just busy. Perhaps they were sorting through. Hundreds of emails and her messages would be read in due time. She told herself that change takes time, and that patience was key. But as the weeks passed without a single response, the seeds of doubt took root. What if her emails weren't reaching the right people at all? What if they were being discarded, without so much as a glance? This thought unsettled Karen deeply. She prided herself on being diligent and responsible. She wanted to be an active participant in her community, a good neighbor who cared about the safety and appearance of the neighborhood. But the mounting silence felt like a rejection, not just of her emails, but of her efforts and commitment. Determined to figure out what was going on, Karen decided to enlist the help of a few trusted neighbors. She wasn't one to cause drama, but she knew she couldn't do this alone anymore. At the next community gathering, she brought up the issue gently, asking if anyone else had tried to communicate with the HOA and what their experiences were like. Some nodded sympathetically, admitting they'd had better luck reaching the HOA through phone calls or in-person visits, but no one was consistently emailing like she was. Still, Karen thought maybe, if more voices joined her, the HOA would have to pay attention. She started copying a few neighbors on her emails, hoping that a larger chorus might break through the barrier. She explained what she was doing in her messages. "I'm including you so that we can show the HOA that these issues affect many of us." But even then, responses were scarce. The few neighbors who did receive her emails often didn't reply, overwhelmed by the constant flow, or unsure how to respond. Meanwhile, Karen found herself growing more anxious. It wasn't just about being heard anymore. It was about accountability. The cracks in the sidewalks were worsening. The flickering streetlight was completely out, leaving the playground in darkness after dusk. The overgrown grass by the clubhouse had become a perfect hiding place for rodents. These weren't minor inconveniences. They were problems that affected the safety and quality of life for everyone in the neighborhood. Her frustration bubbled beneath the surface, and sometimes she caught herself snapping at friends or family when they brushed off her concerns. They'd say things like, "Relax, Karen. It's just a neighborhood. Things take time." But Karen knew that waiting quietly meant letting things fall apart bit by bit. She wasn't willing to accept that. One afternoon, after yet another unanswered email, Karen sat at her desk and stared at her inbox. She realized she needed to dig deeper. Was there something wrong with her emails? Did they get caught in a technical glitch? Or worse, were they deliberately ignored? She reached out to her nephew, Jake, a tech-savvy college student who had always helped her with computer problems. Jake took one look at her email settings and started poking around. He explained the basics. Sometimes email servers have filters that mark messages as spam based on keywords, frequency, or sender address. If your emails are coming in every day with similar content, they might be flagged automatically. Karen's heart sank. Could the HOA be treating her messages like junk mail, tossing them aside without reading? Jake helped her set up a new email account and suggested ways to rephrase her messages to avoid triggering spam filters. Karen took his advice seriously, crafting new emails with different subject lines and tones, hoping to slip past the digital gatekeepers. But no matter what she tried, her inbox remained silent. That's when she realized the problem wasn't just technology. It was the people on the other end. The HOA staff had made a choice to avoid her emails, perhaps because they saw her persistence as a nuisance. This realization stung deeply. Karen felt like she was being punished for caring too much, but she refused to give up. Instead, she began researching the HOA's structure and policies. She learned about the board members, their meeting schedules, and how residents could request to speak at those meetings. This was new territory for her, but Karen saw it as an opportunity to take her efforts beyond emails and into real face-to-face action. She started attending monthly HOA meetings, sitting quietly at the back and taking notes. At first, her presence went unnoticed, but she was determined to make her voice heard. One evening, after weeks of observation, she mustered the courage to ask for a slot to speak. She prepared a brief speech outlining her concerns and her frustration over the lack of response. When her turn came, the room fell silent. Karen spoke clearly and calmly, detailing the issues she had raised in her emails and the silence she'd met in return. Some board members shifted uncomfortably, others avoided eye contact. But Karen's words resonated with a few neighbors in the audience who had begun to realize they weren't the only ones frustrated. The meeting ended without immediate solutions, but Karen felt a spark of hope. She wasn't invisible anymore. People had heard her voice, and that was a start. Back at home, though, she still longed for a direct response from the HOA via email, the channel she trusted and preferred. To keep the pressure on, Karen began compiling a binder filled with printed copies of every email she had sent, along with notes from HOA meetings and photos documenting the issues. She figured if words on a screen were ignored, maybe a physical stack of papers couldn't be so easily dismissed. But as the pile grew thicker, so did her anxiety. The HOA's silence felt like a wall between her and the changes she desperately wanted. The feeling of being sidelined made Karen question her approach. Was she pushing too hard? Was she alienating the very people she needed to work with? Night. She wrestled with these doubts, sometimes wondering if she was just making noise for nothing. Yet beneath the frustration and self-doubt, Karen's resolve only deepened. She wasn't going to stop, not when the safety of her neighbors and the integrity of her community were at stake. She knew the HOA had the power to make things better. They just needed to be held accountable. So every morning Karen continued to send her emails, sometimes with a new twist, sometimes including photos or reports from neighbors who shared her concerns. Each message was a small act of defiance against the silence, a reminder that she was watching, waiting, and refusing to be ignored. And somewhere, behind the screens and filters, the HOA was taking notice, whether they admitted it or not. But that was a secret Karen didn't know yet. For now, all she had was her daily emails and the hope that one day someone would finally read them. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the blinds as Karen clutched the thick stack of papers in her hands. Each sheet was a testament to weeks of unheeded messages, every email she had painstakingly composed, every photograph she had taken of broken sidewalks, faulty streetlights, and overgrown grass that marred the neighborhood she loved. Her fingers trembled just a little, not from nervousness exactly, but from a mixture of determination and exhaustion. Today, she wasn't going to send another email, hoping it would somehow make it past the invisible filter that swallowed her words. Today, Karen was going to confront the HOA face to face. She had rehearsed what she would say countless times in her mind. She wasn't angry, she reminded herself. She was simply a resident who cared, someone who wanted her concerns to be heard and addressed. The pile of printed emails was her evidence, a silent but powerful argument that she had not been ignoring the rules of polite communication. If anything, she had been far too patient. Walking down the quiet street toward the HOA office, Karen felt every step grow heavier with anticipation. The small brick building looked like any other office in the neighborhood, a place of routine meetings and paperwork. But for Karen, it had become a fortress, a place where her voice was trapped behind a digital wall of spam filters and silent inboxes. When she arrived, the receptionist glanced up, clearly surprised to see her carrying such a large binder. "Can I help you?" she asked, the tone polite but slightly wary. "I'm here to speak with the HOA manager," Karen said firmly. "I've been trying to communicate by email for weeks with no response. I have these emails printed out so we can discuss them in person." The receptionist hesitated for a moment, then picked up the phone and made a quick call. A few minutes later, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a clipboard emerged from behind a door. This was Mr. Henderson, the HOA manager. Karen had never met him in person before, but she'd heard his name tossed around at community meetings. Mr. Henderson's expression was unreadable as Karen laid the stack of papers on his desk. "I see," he said slowly, flipping through the first few pages. "You've been very thorough." "Yes, I have," Karen replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I've sent these emails every day, and none of them have been answered. I thought it was just a delay, but now I'm starting to think they weren't even received." Mr. Henderson sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, Karen, I'll be honest with you. Your emails were ending up in the spam folder. It's a filter issue. Sometimes the system flags messages that come in frequently from the same sender. We didn't mean to ignore you, but it got lost in the shuffle." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You mean to tell me that for weeks you were deliberately avoiding my emails by sending them to spam?" No, it wasn't deliberate. More like an oversight. We handle hundreds of emails daily. The filter was supposed to catch genuine spam, but your emails were flagged mistakenly. We apologize if it felt like ignoring, but it wasn't personal." Karen felt a mix of relief and frustration wash over her. Relief that her concerns were finally being acknowledged, but frustration that it had taken this long and that the HOA hadn't been upfront about the issue. "Look," she said, leaning forward, "I'm not here to point fingers. I just want to work with you so these problems get fixed. The broken sidewalk near the park is dangerous. The streetlight has been out for weeks, making the playground unsafe at night. The landscaping near the clubhouse is a mess. These aren't minor complaints. They affect everyone." Mr. Henderson nodded, flipping through the photos Karen had included with her emails. I agree. These are legitimate concerns. We'll get a crew out to fix the sidewalk and replace the streetlight as soon as possible, and the landscaping team will be notified about the clubhouse area. Karen's heart lifted, but she held back her excitement. What about communication going forward? How can I be sure my emails won't disappear again? He thought for a moment, then said, I'll personally make sure your address is added to our priority list. Also, I'll ask the IT department to adjust the filters to prevent this from happening again. They talked a little more about how residents could report issues and the best ways to follow up. Karen was surprised by how cooperative Mr. Henderson suddenly became when faced with her in person, rather than through faceless emails. When the meeting ended, Karen left the office with a sense of victory. For the first time in weeks, she felt heard and validated. The pile of printed emails no longer represented frustration. It symbolized persistence paying off. As she walked back home, she reflected on what this moment meant. The digital walls that had blocked her voice crumbled, not because she stopped emailing, but because she found a new way to break through, by showing up, by standing firm, by demanding to be seen and heard. Back in her kitchen, she carefully organized her papers, now proof of a turning point rather than unanswered pleas. She knew the road ahead still held challenges. Repairs wouldn't happen overnight, and the HOA could still stumble. But she also knew that silence wasn't the end anymore. Karen's persistence had forced the HOA to listen, and in doing so, she had reminded her neighbors and herself that sometimes the only way to be heard is to stop waiting for a reply and start demanding a conversation. The spam folder had hidden her messages for too long, but it couldn't hide her spirit. And as the sun set over the neighborhood that evening, Karen smiled, knowing that the change she fought for was finally beginning. One conversation at a time. Word traveled fast through the neighborhood after Karen's bold visit to the HOA office. What had once been hushed whispers and sideways glances about that email lady transformed into something entirely different. Respect. Karen had always been seen as persistent, maybe even a little annoying to some, but now she was a symbol, proof that one determined person could break through walls, whether digital or human. The story of how her daily emails were buried in the spam folder, only to be uncovered and confronted in person, became a kind of neighborhood legend, shared over backyard fences and community potlucks. The shift in attitude wasn't just about Karen's persistence. It was about the realization that the HOA, despite its authority, wasn't infallible. Residents who had once blindly trusted the system began to question it. Why had so many concerns been ignored? How many other voices were muffled in silence? Karen's experience stirred something in the community, a call for greater transparency and participation. At the next HOA meeting, attendance surged. More neighbors showed up than ever before, many inspired by Karen's story and eager to make sure their voices were no longer lost. Karen herself was invited to speak as a guest, and for the first time she wasn't just one lone voice shouting into a void. She stood confidently before the room, now filled with people who knew her name and understood her commitment. Her speech was clear and passionate. She recounted the frustrations of being unheard and the moment she discovered her emails had been shunted into a digital abyss. But more importantly, she urged everyone to hold the HOA accountable and to build a community where communication wasn't just a checkbox, but a real two-way street. Her words resonated deeply, inspiring a wave of questions, suggestions, and commitments from neighbors and board members alike. The HOA, feeling the growing pressure, began to implement changes. They overhauled their email system, ensuring that filters no longer blocked resident messages unfairly. A dedicated communication liaison was appointed to manage resident concerns promptly. More importantly, the board started holding regular, open forums, encouraging direct dialogue rather than hiding behind emails and memos. Karen's impact extended beyond these procedural changes. She became a rallying figure for community involvement. Neighborhood watch programs gained new momentum, as residents felt empowered to take ownership of their streets. Garden clubs formed to beautify shared spaces, and local events grew in number and attendance. Where there had been apathy, now there was energy and pride. At home, Karen felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The issues she had raised, the cracked sidewalks, the broken streetlights, the neglected landscaping, were finally getting addressed. Walking through the neighborhood, she saw crews repairing pathways, replacing bulbs, and trimming overgrowth. It was tangible proof that persistence pays off, but also that communities flourish when people refuse to be silent. Yet the most remarkable change was less visible, but more profound. A cultural shift. Neighbors started reaching out to each other more, checking in about neighborhood concerns, sharing ideas and solutions. The sense of isolation that had allowed complaints to fall into silence began to dissipate. Karen's daily emails had been a spark, igniting a flame of collective responsibility and engagement. Even the HOA staff began to see residents in a new light, not as a stream of complaints to be filtered out, but as partners in stewardship. The relationship, once strained and distant, evolved into one of cooperation and mutual respect. Emails were answered promptly, meetings were more transparent, and residents felt genuinely heard. For Karen, the journey from ignored email sender to community advocate was transformative. It taught her that persistence alone isn't enough. Sometimes you have to find new ways to make your voice matter. But more than that, it reminded her that change is possible when people come together, when frustration turns into action, and when silence breaks into conversation. Looking back, Karen knew the spam folder wasn't just a technical hurdle, it was a metaphor. It represented the walls people put up to avoid uncomfortable truths and inconvenient voices. But those walls can't hold forever. Eventually, truth seeps through cracks, voices break barriers, and communities grow stronger. As she stood on her porch one evening, watching neighbors gather for a block party she had helped organize, Karen felt a surge of hope. The place she loved was healing, evolving, becoming more than just a collection of houses. It was a living community, messy, imperfect, but vibrant and connected. The HOA might have tried to bury her emails in a spam folder, but Karen had proved that no filter could silence a determined spirit. Her story wasn't just about emails or neighborhood complaints. It was about the power of persistence, the importance of being heard, and the remarkable changes that come when one person refuses to give up.